Duettino, Lucky Darem, Malancaria Signor Francisco.
I'll repeat each of them so that everybody's clear on what exactly the question is. And then we'll ask individual panel members which one of them wants to field the question. I think that'll probably work out okay. So without further ado, let's start on the other end. Joan, why don't you stand up? Joan Rawls.
Hi. My friend, but Don DeFell said I couldn't bring any nippers here because it's Edison's 150th birthday. So we know who's under this mess, don't we? Okay. I'm supposed to be the nipper expert, and I want to tell you that anybody who says they're an expert, they aren't. Okay, so I will try to field your questions. Basically, what I use is sources, and I write articles like for Antiquity and In the Groove, and that's about it. I love nipper. Ask me some questions.
I'm Don Gaffel, and growing up in Milan really started me with my Edison hobby. And so I've been doing Edison basically as a child from the kind of the scrapbook stage. And then during about the last 30 years, I've been a true Edison addict in terms of pursuing the hobby. I do everything Edison, not just phonograph. And I suppose my expertise is in the technology of the things that I am pretty much able to repair anything. I really haven't had too many things that I haven't been able to repair, but there's some expertise there.
I'm Mike Christians. All my associate here, Don Capel, believes Edison. I believe Columbia. Been collecting for about 10 years now, and Carol and I have quite an extensive Columbia collection. And of course, we have a few token Edison and Victor machines. I feel I've got a pretty good working knowledge of many of the details of the Columbia machines, which are usually quite elusive. We'll find out how much I know today, I suppose.
I don't know why I'm here. I've always been taught that an expert is somebody that's a fluent speaker that can talk a lot about nothing. That's me. My part of the phonograph is the repair end of it. I collect a little bit of everything. I collect Columbia, I collect Edison, I collect Victor. I repair more than anything else. I've been in the phonograph collection probably for 30, 35 years. Except the fact that they asked me to be here.
I'm Dave F. and I got all the answers. All I got is fight. Yeah. Thank you.
Dave's been collecting forever.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we have the first question, please. Yes, Bill?
Good Lord.
What year was the first jazz recording? And who was the artist?
The question, but I'm sorry. Okay. The question was, what year was the first jazz recording and who was the artist? Dave Ethel.
My mind went blank. Victor, who was it?
Original Dixieland Jazz and Nickel Rock. 1970.
7.
Number 2 question. What was the second jazz?
I missed the first one. What was the title?
We didn't do St. Louis until 1922.
For those of you in the audience, Bill's the expert. He's a true expert in that area.
Jazz.
What was the title on that second? Enlightenment.
Livery Stable was the first recording. In maps, somebody said it was a different recording. It wasn't the first recording of Livery Stable.
That was Livery Stable Blues in 1917?
Right.
We're disputing Tom Osborne's article. Somebody wrote it and asked a question. We all know the first jazz record was original Dixieland Jazz, and you mentioned some other title. I didn't think it was. I didn't think that was very close.
Okay. Another question, please? Yes.
I don't know if this is a question appropriate for you, but it's one that probably... Last night, somebody mentioned there was some software available for organizing record collections. What would you experts recommend in the way of not only organizing your records and inventorying, but storing them?
The question had to do with software and or general methods for organizing and storing your record collection. Let's take care of this one first. Anybody want to?
On storage? On storage, are you referring to 78 records?
Primarily, yeah.
Primarily. The way I've been taught and everything else is to store them on end in a cool, dry place. I have stored records outside in Indiana where the temperature is 20 below zero and as high as 90 degrees in a garage, and it still stayed perfect. That's standing on edge and staying where it's cool and dry in summertime or winter. I haven't lost them that way, but the trouble with 78 records are formaldehyde base, and I've laid them down on a table while I was cleaning. As the sun comes across, they will curl up or they'll crack.
Yeah, so when they take a set, it's awfully difficult to get them to go back through, but that's the nature of the challenge. The reason why I ask is with the advent of the computer, I bought some software database and I started on my own. And I'm kind of inventorying my manufacturing and record numbers. This summer, my wife and I went into a shop in New Jersey, and I would say the man probably had somewhere between, I'd say at least 15,000 records. And he had them by artist, and then alphabetical by title. And it was so easy to find stuff, I thought, you know, me, I'm going the wrong way. And I thought, well, let me ask you people. You've been at it a long time. What do you use, if anything at all?
I've got a couple thoughts on the software.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to say, definitely use a computer. I think if you know, Dave, you can help me out on this, but I know we just use a spreadsheet. And anyway, it doesn't matter how you put them on, because when you search them, boy, you just put in the information and things come up. Side A, side B, what price you paid, you know, just everything. So the computers are just a godsend today as far as I'm concerned. And right now we're grouping all of ours together. I don't see why you need a different disc for each one, unless you're that David at the end and you have all those beer cartons of records. You know, really, it's just a wonderful method of organization and searching, and all you need is the information in there, put it in there correctly, and put it in there consistently.
As a footnote to that, too, once you got the data in, spreadsheet of your choice. The sorting matter is very trivial because you just do the thing and it takes just a few seconds or less. Yeah, by title, by artist, by number, any way you want to do it. I personally use Microsoft Excel for doing that. It's very good. I was just handed the brand new piece of software, coincidentally, by Phil Stewart last night at the meeting. And I promised to evaluate it and write a review in the an upcoming newsletter about it. So watch for that.
How costly will that be? You know, what
I thought I saw like a $39 price tag or something on it. I just reviewed it.
Well, all I can say is many times this is already on your computer, so why buy something
Yeah.
as expensive?
That's right.
What's the spreadsheet you use? From Microsoft.
Must be Excel or Word.
Excel,
After you get all that work done on the computer, you still got to find the record.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's where organization comes in.
Yeah.
That's where the student
Dave,
is.
that was the
Practical
second
guy.
part of my question in the storage. This fella has on stuff on shelves, and he had them in milk cartons. And they were so easy to find.
Well, you can't get beer cartons anymore. I got mine divided by label, and then in beer cartons by numerical. And then you just go to the original catalogs, which are 3 ways, alphabetically or numerically, and look up what you want. Find out what the number is, and then go to your carton and pick it out.
Assuming you have the original catalog.
Well, that's another
That's a
collection.
lot.
I'll guarantee you fix that will fight for a record.
Yeah, sure.
I got the catalogs. Call me and give me a title, and I'll give you a number.
In storage, I had cabinets made.
In beer cases.
Okay, I had cabinets made, and they have partitions every 5 inches. And then I buy the sleeves from Bags Unlimited in Rochester, which is not the only place, but the best place. And that's how I do it. And I do it on Paradox by catalog number. In fact, my sheets are over there somewhere on the table. And again, you have to have the catalogs to find the record you want. But, and I'll buy label. All Victor's here, Columbia's here, Let's show up.
That's probably about the best way, in my opinion, too, of storage because it's pretty well bulletproof. I have another method that I use most of the time, but it's not always reliable because let's say you have a Billy Murray collection, let's say you have an Ada Jones collection. Well, they frequently on the same disc on different opposite sides, for example. You know, how do you deal with that? That's the problem.
How long have you had experience using the polyurethane bags for the record?
Okay, I don't use polyurethane. They're the heavy paper.
Oh, they're the paper.
They're the craft paper.
Okay.
And I buy the envelope. I got about 5,000 records, and I buy the envelopes by the 500. And they are. Oh, then I have a rubber stamp that I index the record label. I stamp it in 4 places. No matter how you go looking for the figure shelves, you're looking at the catalog number of the record. Doing it by catalog number is the easy way, and doing it by title, you have to be a lot more meticulous, which I don't have time to be, and or by artist. It's up to you how you want to do it, really. But the most convenient way and the easy way out is by catalog. I have the Victor Master book. I have all the books I need for it, so it's not a problem. Otherwise, it's a problem.
I was kind of curious down with poly bags. I did buy several, and I started realizing by the time you can grab a stack of records in paper sleeves, and they don't slide. You can hang on to them. You get those poly sleeves on it, things just slide so smoothly down each other. It's really easy to wipe out the whole handful. Just caution for you want some good poly bags.
Yeah.
There, once you clean the record, it's pretty safe.
Yes.
For having Murray on one side, the record is Murray file. There's a piece of cardboard on the side of the record.
Is that good do a modified version of that myself. Like I mentioned, I use Excel spreadsheet documentation. And when I've got conflicting categories like that, I'll put a reference to one, from one to the other. Within the spreadsheet.
There was a guy at that exchange in Pittsburgh that had the world largest 78 crayon things. He had a word. Yes, the name of the man who wanted to prove.
One other word of caution, I'd like to say these shellac records are horribly, horribly heavy. And you never, possibly could never store them on the upper floor of the house. Oh, really?
Yeah, we've heard about that.
Try and do that in the basement. Now, mine are all in the basement. But the PSI loading on the floor is more than most floors are made to hold.
Now, that actually happened. There was a person who I never got to meet. Was it Art Canadian?
Yeah.
He had a collection. I don't know how many he had. He had a lot.
He had a lot.
Had them all stored in an attic, wasn't it? Or a second floor, I think.
Second floor.
The Joyce gave way. They fell on the dining room table. Yes.
Another comment on computer record keeping and such. I have a home inventory program called Sort the Record by the Novo Press, which is almost an anti-lawyer, no offense, anti-lawyer group where they have software helping you find your own lawyers. But the software is for home inventory use where you can put in where you bought it, how to maintain it, where the receipts are, paperwork, serial numbers, all sorts of stuff. And it's making categories for inventory which you have in your home, like securities, or collectibles, or furniture, or pictures, whatever. And I use that for what few machines I have, so it can be very useful for someone with a lot of machines to record all the details about what machine you have, where you got it done for it, what you paid for it. And you can also print out various reports from that, list of that, and store it away in a safe place. I don't know with the thousands of records that you're talking about, that'd be good for catalog records themselves. It might be a little too cumbersome with that. But for everything else in the house, I found it too good size.
Yes.
What's the best, safest way to clean that white gunk or whatever it is that forms on the old brown wax and some of the black records off without damaging the music that's there?
None. I'll attempt it, and I basically have to refer to a 90-some-year-old gentleman now that has been a serious record collector of cylinders all his life. And some of this has been written too, but pure silicone is about the only product that I have heard, some of the old timers, talk about to use safely so that it does not chemically react with the wax. And that's what I use. I use it all the time. That's the only thing. I use pure silicone. And it's kind of difficult to find. They use pure silicone mostly in like hospitals and fire stations and things like that. It's not the silicone that you buy at the department stores that's the oil type. Not that.
So it is a liquid of some sort.
Yeah, but the main thing. Yeah, and that's what I was going to point out next, John, is you have to be very, very careful, when doing this. I usually, hold the cylinder with basically a bathroom towel is the material that I use. But you have to get pretty good at this, or otherwise it's going to, be very harmful because they'll crack your record. So if you do it directly from the spray can, you have to make sure that you're back far enough so that the temperature change, doesn't, cause the record to crack. So I recommend, anytime I recommend this, I always tell people to spray it on the cloth, until you get some experience behind this, to wipe it off. Because if you put it on the cylinder and if you don't do it, kind of uniformly and slowly far enough, it'll just, there'll be too much temperature change there for expansion, contraction, crack the cylinders. But I have, that's something I have used for at least 20 years. And so I've not found any in my real best. That's the only thing I do.
Do you have a brand name?
Yes, Kellogg's is the only one that I know of, and it's made in Sandusky, Ohio.
Isn't that somewhere here?
Yeah. Yes. One of the places around here is the Quality Farm and Fleet, type stores. That's the only store around this area that I really know.
We've got those stores in a lot of places.
And we, when I buy it, I usually, like buy 20 cans. And if I can't find the current dealer, then I usually call, and then they'll tell me, where there's a dealer in the area.
Is there one around here?
Quality Farm and Fleet, yeah, in Sandusky, and one in Norwalk. Those are the only two stores in this whole area that I know right now that carry that.
Don, does it actually clean, or, silicone has some properties that put it in the category of a wonderful lubricant.
Yeah.
Does it actually clean the record, or does it fill pores and act as a lubricant?
I think that it does both. I think that it cleans the record. I think it does act as a lubricant. The second half of my story is that I usually do this 3 times. And, when I do it the first time, then I usually play it, okay? And then I do it again.
Changes the audibility?
Yeah, yes.
I might further add on that general subject, just in my experience, brown wax cylinders seem more impervious, if you will, to that sort of phenomenon than perhaps black wax cylinders. If you were to simply try playing the cylinder to try to clean it, wax would be better. In my experience, with the brown wax would seem to clean up easier just by having the stylus contact and good grooves than the black wax might. Yes?
Don, all right, after you clean this brown wax cylinder, you don't put it back in the carton, the moldy carton that came out of it.
Sometimes I do, and, a lot of times I have a cabinet, that I keep most of my brown wax in.
But do you take the felt lining out before you?
There no container
No
at all.
lining in the brown?
They're the cabinet, with the pegs in
Oh,
it.
without the...
Yeah.
Cabinet.
And I think, for any of the young, like we all know that, if you're not storing them correctly, then, make sure you get them out of the 2-minute, felt line containers, because that's where the damage comes from. Is, if they're stored and you go through temperature change and humidity, with the moisture, that's what creates all of the problems with those records. So that's why a lot of times if you find, the records that have been in a home and in one of the record cabinets, then chances are you got a good bunch of records. But, otherwise they're bad, and usually if you find one, you only need to look at one in the box. And if they've been stored in the same place, they're all the same. Because actually it's just, it's a mildew, which is a chemical reaction. And, people always, talk about cleaning it or think you're trying to, buy a record cheap. Well, you can clean it. Well, you can clean it, but, the sound is the vibration, and of course the vibration, is in the groove, and the mildew is actually a chemical reaction where it just roots, so you can clean all you want, and it's not going to do anything, for the sound, of those that are bad. They're just bad. That's all you're going to do is cosmetics.
Well, I was told by a medical person that freezing will kill mold. Has anybody ever tried to put records in the freezer, and or not the record itself, but the box, and then reuse the box? Would it be all right,
That'll fall in the same category. A few years back, somebody started the rumor of cleaning with Lysol. Taking the box, taking all the cylinders out of the box, spray Lysol in. Lysol will kill mold, but just for a matter of
just a matter of time? Just
I tried that and was black rock cylinders, and they looked fine for about a month, and I got them out to play them, about 6 months later, they were mowed. So the Lysol Act does that work all the time.
Have you tried freezing? Has anyone tried freezing?
I've tried in the other house that I used to have, a freezer down there.
Now, I know you used to keep yours in a freezer.
I used to keep all my stuff in that freezer, but it was never hooked up. What it was a chest-type freezer, and it had
Keep
a perfect
humidity
seal
out of
around it. And I put all my 2-minute wax in that, and they stayed perfect all the time. But it was unbound. The freezer was sealed tight. But that's where I kept it.
Yeah, I know.
Now that I've moved, I've lost that.
Yeah.
I don't know, if you freeze wax,
Well, not actually the cylinder, just the box,
Yeah,
you know.
box.
Yeah, after you use the silicone on the record, try freezing the box to kill the mold in the box, and then put them back in that box.
We'll expect a review on that in the newsletter in a couple months about
I ain't got guts enough to try it.
My advice is look for a better copy.
There you go.
It's like the gentleman brought up above there about 78. When you got a 78 drawer, and leads wrong and what have you, you can straighten them out. And it's risky. You can take a 1-inch or a 1/2-inch steel plate and a 12-inch square is what I use. Heat your oven up to 200 degrees. So it's like that. Stick the record on it, stick it in the oven for about 3 or 4 minutes. It will come down flat. But when you bring it out, you got to leave it on that plate to cool off. And then you can pick it up.
Yeah.
You can do this, like if you have 4 or 5 nice records in on a safe, you can do this. But the bad part of that, the side effect of that, is once they're cooled, they might crack. I've had a couple of real good records that were warped, and I cleaned them up, and they look good for 2 days, but I got them out later, and they got a hairline crack right now. So, it's something you just play with, I guess.
Do a lot of experimenting.
It's an experiment.
Before.
But a lot of them that I've done that way are still playing a little bit.
Yeah, I've done.
Under storage of cylinder records, I use a system, they're plastic drawers, individual drawer sections, and they come, and you get 40 in a drawer, and they're just the right height for the cylinder records, and you can just stack them one on top of the other, you know, and you can move them, you know, drawer by drawer, and each drawer holds about 40 records. It works out real good, except like when I bought them new, I got to go home and move 2,000 records to put them all in line. You know, every drawer, you got to go through, line them all back up. And I store mine all numerical.
Eileen?
What do you know about the 6-inch Columbias? Their history?
Question is, what do we know of 6-inch Columbia cylinder records,
right.
I believe, history, etc. I don't know a whole lot about those, except that they weren't made terribly long, from, I believe, 1905 to 1907, I think. Does that sound right to everybody? Yeah. So because of that, they're highly prized. There weren't a lot of them made, and therefore they become quite collectible. Anybody else have any comments on that?
Pretty much the same, you know, primarily for the 20th century, you know, machine, and so therefore they are, you know, as Mike said, rare.
They're just an attempt to make a longer playing record, which was pushed Edison into the 4-minute record.
Make a Columbia machine besides the 20th century that has a 6-inch band.
Oh, absolutely. VF, VFT, the VO.
And if you are fortunate enough to grab a hold of one of those machines, take some of the 2-minute cylinders that won't fit on a regular manual, will fit on that.
Yeah. Or regular blue amberals that are become kind of egg-shaped. They'll go on that manual quite nicely. Yeah. Don, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious to know about the rarity of 14-inch Victors and Columbias. Does anybody have any 14-inch Victors or Columbias?
The last 14-inch Victors or Columbias that I saw personally were, you know, from the Drake, you know, Museum, and Kurt Knopf did, you know, purchase that record collection, but that's the first time that I had ever seen one.
Just curious.
I think I know those are very rare because I talked to him about it. Yeah.
I have a 14-inch Victor. I also have a 14-inch buffet.
14-inch what?
A buffet, 14-inch one-sided buffet record. It's a stylus type stuff.
14-inch.
Pathé.
Oh, pathé, yes. They're a little more common, I think, as I recall.
I've only seen it one.
They made it from whatever they needed.
Yeah.
I want to interject something. Nobody's asking a repair thing, but I have to share this with somebody because, it was very significant to me, and it just happened within the last week. And many of you changed springs, and so forth in machines, and Norm, I don't know how many I've changed, at least 500. And I bought a machine. It was actually a sonophone machine from another fellow collector who has been repairing machines as long as I have been repairing machines. And he told me when I purchased the machine, he said, Don, I don't know what to tell you about this. He says, I replaced the spring, and it's still, I can't get it to play half of a record, through it, and it should. And he said, I took the spring back out, and I sent it back to Ron Sitko, and Ron, gave me another spring, but he assured me that there was no difference and nothing wrong, and so forth, with that spring. And so he said, I don't know what to tell you, except, that's how you're buying. So the machine was still okay price-wise for me to buy, so I purchased it. Well, I put it on my shelf in a store, and an individual, agreed to buy it, lay it away. And I told him right away, I said, now I haven't had a chance, to look at that machine, but I'll get it ready for you, and I'm selling it with the idea, that it's fully, workable. So I took that to my shop, went back in the shop one night, and, took it over and so forth, and found and looked at all of the gear things in it, because oftentimes, most of the time, you got a tight gear, on a shaft or something, that's the problem, when it won't play all the way through or quite enough power. And that thing, I spent a lot of time trying to free that thing up, puzzle the dickens out of it. I said, there's nothing, you don't have to take the spring out. Because I did everything else. And so I took that spring out, and then it came to me, after there was nothing wrong and so forth. Well, the problem was that spring, was so close in the barrel, and the way that the thing attached, there was so much friction on the side plates of the barrel, that's what all of the problem was. And I did not have, a correct size spring. And so I put a spring in, that was considerably undersized, like by almost 1/4 of an inch in width. Okay, the length thing, no problem. And thing just, you can't keep the thing from running. And I've done like an awful lot of springs, and I'm sure that I've had that similar kind of problem. So, boy, make sure when you stick a spring in a barrel that you check the width of that thing and make sure that you have plenty of flexibility on the side, or that's going to take away, 50% of the energy immediately, with the frictions rubbing against the sidewall. And I wanted to share that because it was a real, by a real experienced person other than myself too, before I solved it.
Just 1 second. I have something to add to that too, along the same lines. When you're, let's say, going to the trouble to replace the spring, don't forget to check the rest of the system. For example, if you were to go through the whole gear chain, et cetera, from a traditional engineering standpoint, you might be tempted to get everything fitting pretty close. If you do that, it ain't going to work worth a darn. You got to give it lots of room to breathe, make those gears relatively loose. In fact, in regard to the governor, sometimes you need to take it completely apart, soak it in a good cleaning agent, or otherwise give it a real good cleaning so that everything will slip real easily. If there's any friction at all, it's going to steal away the energy, like Don said.
Why did you change that size of your spring? I mean, did you just get a different one, different size?
Yeah, I just put I have quite a supply of springs, and I just used a narrower.
While you're on that same subject, Don, I guess we worked down the same line. for the past year, I've had a problem with Victor machines. I don't know how many of you people have had Victor machines, especially the single spring Victor 1.1 and the Victor 4 and the Victor 6. You wind it up, you put your turntable down an outside edge, and it just comes down to a halt. And you go through that motor completely, and you can't find anything wrong with it. I've had two Victor 4s in the last 3 months that I buy my springs from Galeni now, and I explained to him what I was having. I took a 22,000 spring in that machine. I went to 24,000. In both those machines, here's the problem.
That's right. Oh, same. Okay.
And you just got to talk to your spring supplier and say, hey, this is the problem I have. I don't know what the problem is with that Victor 4 or that 1.1, except the shaft went through the spring barrel, or just the normal wear on the main shaft. But there's no gear reduction like in the Columbia, because you're just going from barrel here to main shaft. And if you don't have the power in that spring, it's not going to turn that main shaft on a Victor. The other one that you have on problem with Victor is the one that shows the readout up on top. It shows you're turning at 78 RPM. I've fixed those a lot of times. 6 months later, people say, my machine don't play. That thing freezes up and it acts just like a brake. You got to pull that little piece all the way apart, clean the carbon tip chloride, put it back in, and work fine.
Yes.
I guess years ago, when machines were built, accepted lubricant was powdered graphite mixed with a light oil. Are we still finding that's the best way to go these days when you're putting the spring back in the barrel? Or is there something that we found nowadays with all the new lubricants and so on that's any better?
I use a white lithium grease. Light lithium grease. I don't use white graphite anymore.
With no wax.
It's
Waxless grease.
Yes, white lithium grease, and you don't have to use as much. I pulled motors apart, and I swear they got glue in them of the old grease that they've had. In fact, the spring's wound up, and you clean it out, and you can just see the spring expand. It works just like glue. You don't have the Victor knock. It's in a Victor machine. You crank it up, and it's playing a little thump. Let's go.
A lot of times on the, on the same line as, with the problem you have with the greases as the thump and so forth, and, I think we all have to be careful in terms of like what you recommend, anyway, because there's usually, a positive and a negative, when you do these various things, whether it's putting a little oversized spring in, with a machine that doesn't necessarily have the gears and stuff to take care of it. But the same with I was going to pass on another little hint. In terms of doing the springs and the motors and so forth, I think you always have to be, concerned with the safety. But they're really, I've never had any problems. But a lot of times in the older ones, rather than tearing them apart and all this kind of thing, a lot of times I just use my small torch and have it go and heat, the drum barrel and the grease that you have in there that's dried up and stuff like that. You can cure a thumping machine pretty easily, oftentimes that way. Not always, but oftentimes you can if you do that, a couple of times. And you have to rewind it, and do it 2 or 3 times. But it works in terms of, because when you take this machine that's been stored in the attic for 70 years or 60 or whatever, it does hard, and so it creates a problem. And a lot of times that will make a machine work and you don't have a lot into it. And I'm telling you that's the best way, but sometimes it's a quick way, and if you don't have the spring or the experience of replacing the spring, you'll have a working machine.
In conjunction with that heating process, of course, after it cools a bit, are you using any kind of a light penetrant to help out?
A lot depends on the machines. I always, if I have, any little place at all where I can get, even WD-40 or any of those, kinds of things with the spray and stuff like that. And I use that silicone in all of my stuff because it's clean and you don't have to worry about anything and so forth. But wherever you can, I try to get that stuff in. Of course, with some machines like the Diamond Disc and so forth, they got the plug in it, and you can, put, some of your WD-40 and loose it, and then you can put your oil in it. Those are easy. But, most of them you can't. But a lot of the homes, the early homes and so forth, they all have, the 4 or 5 holes, around the side or where the a plate goes on where before the spring, turn the thing on its side, fill that. You can always get, some in there and all those things help.
Well, I guess I picked a good brand initially because all my diamond disc machines run real well.
Yeah.
And that one Victor I have playing the 78 is the one that bangs.
Yeah.
Found a quick fix for some of that cake stuff, that old cake of graphite lubricant is liquid wrench. You don't feel like taking the spring on. If you just take the cover out, put a little liquid wrench on the coils, you can see it seep in, and you can just about see it churn in the old grease. I don't know if there's a chemical reaction going on or what. But you put that in and wind it up all the way to redistribute it and get that old grease working again. And usually that's very helpful. And when you put new grease in after you've cleaned it, I always try and put a little on the spring and putting it in and packs it in the center. And while it's not always a good idea to wind up the phonograph all the way, once you put the grease in, it's not a bad idea to do that just once. Squeeze all that grease out of the center and distribute it to the whole length of the spring.
On some of those Victors with that inch and a quarter spring, wider spring than its own 2-inch barrel, I pulled them apart already, and it's like a shellac or something on there, that even after you pull the spring apart and clean it, once the spring is dry and we're playing around putting it back in this barrel, it started in the barrel. That stuff shows up again. I don't know if this is something they used when they made that spring back in those days or not, but if you'll go about halfway in the middle of one of those springs that's sticky like that, the thing got hairline cracks on both sides or at the center of the spring. I'll throw the spring away from the new one. But I have found that in some of those inch and a quarter Victor springs. The ends look good, the centers are shot.
I think later on, didn't Victor get away from the graphite?
Good evening.
Is it?
Yes, it is. It's evening, and it's finally here.
I'd like to welcome all of you to our Phonograph convention. This has sort of been a special one in so many ways, and we'll have more to say about that a little bit later. I'd like to ask, if you would, to bow with us while the Reverend Don Chichester, who is minister of the Gilbert Presbyterian Church in Gilbert, West Virginia, gives our invocation, please.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we gather together this weekend, having come from many miles to honor a man whom you have given to us with great talent and genius. That man is Thomas Alva Edison. We thank you, Lord, for what he has meant for our lives and for the phonograph which brings us together in this Phonovention. We thank you for memories etched in wax and for friendships etched in our hearts. Bless this dinner that we might be strengthened by it, and bless our fellowship that we shall this evening and in months and years ahead remember it and be blessed by it. Bless those who have prepared the food, and let us remember always those who are less fortunate than we. All this we ask in the name of our Lord. Amen.
I don't know if I told you about my Uncle Albert.
Tell us about Al.
He was a barber for quite a few years in Hondo, Texas, and small towns have close relationships. One day the priest came in from the local church and got a haircut, and as he was about to leave, the priest was going to pay him, and Albert said, Father, don't do that. Let me just make this a gift to God. I'd like to honor God by just not charging you for your haircut. Well, the next day there was a bunch of prayer books on his doorstep and a note of thanks from the priest. I thought that was really nice. Well, a few days later, a policeman came in to get his haircut, and when he left, was going to pay, and Albert said, no, this is for my community. I don't want you to have to pay for your haircut. I'll do it as a service to my community. Well, the next day there was a dozen donuts on the door and a thank you note from the policeman. I don't know what he thought of donuts for, but he did. And later, the senator came in to get his haircut. And so when he went to leave, Albert says, no charge, Senator. I'm going to do this as an honor to my country. The next day, there was a dozen more senators on the doorstep. Well, it's time to eat, and we need to get started on that. It is my privilege to delegate the tables. Isn't that a wonderful, powerful thing to do? And because our guest speaker and his family are here this evening, I'd like to start with this row and then work through the middle and then through the last row. Kenny, I'm sorry to make your row the last one. Oh, is he?
I got elbow room on both sides.
Well, all right, let's start with this row even so. I'm sorry, I didn't see you back there. I thought you got over here. Well, let's start with this outside row, middle row, and then the inner row. We can make two lines on both sides of the table, and when it gets down a little lower, just join up and go up through the line. Please help yourselves.
Man, it's 4 lines, 2 on each side.
Thank you.
Kind of starts, I think, Doreen, in terms of taking care of all of the reservations and, getting all the money and so forth. And next, I think, one of the most underrated, persons that, has a major responsibility in putting this program together with successes is Paul Ladd. He just has a very, difficult, challenging job, and I certainly want to thank Paul and, and his team in terms of like what they do. And again, Doreen and Maxine and Dolores, we can't say it enough, and I want you to know that we really do appreciate you, and they've been doing it for so long. It's easy to take them for granted, but there's a heck of a lot that has to happen, out there in the doorways and, that kind of thing. And of course, my Christians, I really appreciate, because a big success is the seminars, and along with that, of course, are the seminar participants. I told her that I was going to embarrass her, but I didn't tell Robin. I think that Joan and Robin, she probably owes me not only a hug, but probably a kiss tonight, because this is the first time that I can remember in a long time that we haven't called upon them, to do a real significant part of our program and all that. And I thought that, since they're, all the way from Wisconsin and stuff here, and all of the things that, they're jobbers and, things like that, and I know how busy they've been, in their home state with the celebration, so I gave you a reprieve, but that doesn't mean that we don't expect something from you next year. And as far as, locally here, I want to introduce my son. Stand up, David. For those of you that thought that this young man that was helping me, do all of the lugging and things like this. I really wouldn't have been able to do this without him the last couple of weeks, So Marcia, I hope that you please excuse him. So I'd like to introduce Dave's wife, Marcia, too. And of course, Bobby really does, a whole lot of things. What? Oh, I'm sorry, that's not really my son, Greg. I think a lot of people thought he was because of the way he was helping me, so much today and doing so much. He's just a really, really good Edison friend, and happened to be nearby, and so he got stuck with a lot of things. And Dick reminded me that today was Sweetest Day, and asked me what I got you, Bobby, and I told him I think we bought another concert today. Okay, and there's a lot of other people, that do so much, and the co-chairman of this thing, and, the decorations that you see on the tables, the hotel reservation things, the planning of the setup and so forth. And, these are just as fine of friends as I have, Dick and Jean. Oh, the scarecrows, I'm reminded, have to go back. Yeah, okay, we'll do this and things. Okay. It's always dangerous, and you go on, because there's so many more of you, that need to be thanked. And, my friend from here, and Dick, you've heard him several times in the things, and his, knowledge and so forth in terms of the internet and the website and so forth. And, as a new member who really, helped. And we got a lot of response from that. And so we really appreciate that, Dick, in terms of, what, and new people, doing, a lot of things. And of course, this guy, you should never, it's just unbelievable, in terms of wherever you are, however far they come and so forth, and you don't ever have to ask him, He's on the phone, getting me on the ball a couple of times, just volunteering and stuff like that. And that's the honest God's truth. There are very few people like John Hauger. And Reverend Don, thank you, too, for, invocation and all you do and so forth. The next two people I'd like to introduce, first of all, is the president of the Milan Chamber of Commerce, Richard Smith, and he's an avid Edison friend of mine, and we also have served many terms on the local Chamber of Commerce together, so I'd like to introduce Dick Smith. Dick.
I don't think the term avid is correct. I think now it's rabid. It's certainly a pleasure and an honor to host this meeting this evening here in Milan. Today when I was going through looking at all the displays, as I do many times now, I really am humbled. Because I realized tonight when I was coming down here, I thought, well, you know, what do I say? I mean, hello, nice to be here type of thing. But what I did realize tonight was that the Cleveland Indians will be playing a ball game that will reach literally around the world. And that ball game will be played under lights. And the sound from that ball game will be because of the man that we're honoring here this evening. And from this little village, this humble beginning, came a magnificent growth of economic and technological and just simply beautiful ideas. And it's with that idea in mind that I greet you tonight and say that we've got some youngsters in our crowd. And I think Thomas Edison once said that the greatest invention on earth was the mind of a child. And with that in mind, it is my sincere hope that when you leave here from Milan this evening, that you will do everything in your power to promote the magnificent things that Thomas Edison has done for the world, this community, and just for humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. The next individual I would like to introduce, many of you have met, you know, before. We had a major Edison celebration here about 5 years ago, or 4, whatever it was, and many of you gained his friendship at that particular time because of his help and involvement and with that event. And so at this time I'd like to introduce our mayor of Milan, Robert Bickley.
I don't use Edison as far as the microphone. I'm used to talking without the mic, and hopefully, can anyone cannot hear me? I understand we have somebody who flew in from Idaho. Could you come forward, please? Well, he's coming forth. I'd like to present him with the book that Smucker's put out for the little village, and that how we came out of the fire, and the reference to that is the people from Connecticut came and claimed their property rights here. And so, as a result, we have a little history, and maybe you can spread the word from here to the west, and thank you for coming to Milan.
You bet.
I served 10.5 years on council before I got elected mayor. And one of the things I found out is that if you don't do the job right, they make you do it over. And I'm a slow learner. And maybe something like Edison or something rubs off in this town is that I wasn't made partially deaf, but I got a good set of lungs out of it. But it's an honor to represent Bobby and Don Gappell and Dick Smith, and Dave is almost like he's a son here also. When we had the globes, I initiated at the chamber banquet, the globes around the square, the 18 lampposts. I said, we'll figure it out, but $200, whoever comes first, you know, can claim one of those globes. And Dave was the first one in the utilities office with his $200. And after they got them blown, I found out they were around about $300, but I got it just for the price of glass. The guy that blew the glass from Columbus, Ohio, donated his, and that's one of my responsibilities, to make people work. And this guy blew 18, or actually 22 globes for nothing. So someone said, well, Mayor, you got a lot of wind. Maybe you should be down there helping them. I never thought also that I would become an international mayor. 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Iwata City, Japan, and rededicate the memorial that they built for Thomas Edison, appreciation choosing the bamboo from their community. I've been invited back. I'm leaving the 28th of this month to go back and help celebrate their city's 20th anniversary. And all it costs is your plane fare, and when you get there, they treat you like kings. And it's an opportunity to go and to see the memorial. So with all this in mind, I put together some proclamations, and it says, whereas Milan, Ohio provides the environment that attracts families to settle here since 1818. And whereas still in 1997, people enjoy and protect what we have here, plus improve upon and add to the environment. As we see here in the village this weekend with the Phonovention 97 and Settlers Day. Whereas families still share their human resources in keeping Thomas A. Edison as a part of our living environment. And whereas Milan is proud to welcome Michigan Antique Phonograph Society maps and its Phonovention 1997 to the village this October 17th and 18th. Whereas it is only fitting that Milan, Ohio tells the world that there are still people in our world who appreciate and keep alive the many inventions and ideas of the boy who saw tomorrow. In this 150th year of the anniversary of the birth of Thomas Alva Edison. Now therefore I, Robert C. Bickley, Mayor of Milan, Ohio since 1976, do here proclaim October 17th and 18th, 1997 as the Michigan Antique Phonograph Society Day and in Milan, Ohio, and urge all his visitors all to visit the displays at the Main Street School and to visit the Edison birthplace and enjoy the Village Settlers Day events. In witness whereof I have hereto set my hand and caused this seal of Milan, Ohio to be affixed the 17th day of October 1997.
I proudly accept this in the name of the club, and it will go in the archives with the rest of the souvenirs. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bob. I also would share with you, Bob serves as a trustee on the Birthplace Museum and is also very involved and is a current director with in the Chamber of Commerce. And the only other person I think you know that we need to introduce, and he doesn't need any introduction, is the president. And we found out that, you know, we don't need to pay too much attention because he doesn't do any work anyway. But Dave right from Mars. I mean, where can you get it better than that? You know, the man from Mars, David.
You're going to have to pass that microphone over here if you keep it up.
We appreciate, you know, we appreciate David, you know, how you do.
Thank you very much, John. That was very helpful. David and Doreen both here are mainstays in the MAPS organization. Dave is a charter member of the group, and I'd like for Dale Monroe Cook, if he would, to stand again, please. He's our other charter member. And there's a lovely lady to my left here I want to be sure we introduce, and that is the Reverend Don Chichester's wife, Jane Chichester. Very lovely lady. For those of you who know my wife, Garnet, my semi-precious jewel, I think we've been calling her, we now call her the Precious Diamond. She finished her PhD this year, and she's working on the revisions, but she's on her way now, thank goodness, from MSU. It's a lot of work, 8 years of effort on that thing. Did I tell you, I know there's a lot of people here who have heard about my Uncle Albert, but there's many here who haven't. And my Uncle Albert is big on music. He loves music too. And he takes walks every day, and he comes by the house, and I said, you know, why don't you get yourself one of those little pocket radios and a pair of headphones, and you could listen to the radio while you're walking. He said, you know, I may do that. Well, a couple of days later, sure enough, down the sidewalk he came, and he had these huge headphones, great big headphones on each ear. But as he got closer to the house, I noticed they weren't headphones. They were bandages. And I walked out and I said, Albert, what happened to you? And he said, well, I burned my ears. And I said, well, how? Well, he said, I was ironing my shirt this morning, and the phone rang. I just picked up the iron and said hello. I said, that must have hurt. Yeah, he said it hurt really bad. I said, well, what happened to the other ear? Well, he says they called back. I know you've heard that 3 or 4 times, but many have not, and I don't want to miss the opportunity for them to hear as well. Okay, we'd like to move into the presentation for this evening, and to do that, I'd like to ask Bill Klinger, if he would, to come and introduce our speaker this evening. Bill?
Thank you, John. Our guest speaker tonight is Jerry Fabris, who is the curator of sound recordings at the Edison National Historic Site, which I think everybody knows is Thomas Edison's laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey. Jerry's been there about 8 years, and it's the first time in the 110-year history of that laboratory that anyone has been dedicated solely to preserving the sound recordings that are at that facility. Jerry manages more than 27,000 Edison disc records and 10,000 cylinders that have been at that lab since Edison's lifetime. He modestly says that he also organizes phonograph-related special events at the site. And I wanted to tell you what some of these events are. Jerry has a real love of music and history, and one of the things that's intrigued him is exactly how cylinders were originally recorded. What were the techniques that were used by Edison and the men that worked for him? And in the course of investigating that kind of technology, Jerry has made modern cylinder recordings in a number of sessions working together with recording expert Peter Dilge. Some of the people that they have recorded in recent years include the Wynton Marsalis Septet, Les Paul, often considered the inventor of the electric guitar, Christopher Lee, who is concertmaster of the New Jersey Symphony, but what makes that distinguished was that he played a Stroh violin that had been restored just for that event. Jerry's also recorded Patsy Stoneman, who is the daughter of Edison recording artist Ernest V. Stoneman, the alternative pop band They Might Be Giants, and that band, crazy as it might sound, actually released one of Jerry's brown wax recordings on their CD Factory Showroom in 1996. They had written one song called The Edison Museum, but the song that appeared on that CD is called I Can Hear You, and it's all about the difficulties of hearing through modern media like the loudspeaker at the drive-in restaurant. Just this year, Jerry recorded the Fisk University Jubilee Quartet in Nashville, the first time that group has been recorded on cylinders since 1911. He also recorded pop artist Marshall Crenshaw earlier this year, and at the Interpreting Edison Conference in New Jersey, he recorded Lauren Schoenberg's Scrap Iron Jazzerinos. Tonight, Jerry's going to play for you some of the oldest surviving cylinder recordings in the world. Jerry?
First, I want to pass out some handouts for this talk tonight. First of all, I want to say thanks to Bill. A few years ago, he arranged to have In the Groove sent on a regular basis to the Edison site. And since then, I've really enjoyed and learned a lot from reading it each month. So I'm really happy to be able to contribute to the organization today. And I also wanted to thank Don Gaffel for allowing me to speak tonight, because I think it's a really good thing for the different Edison sites throughout the country to keep in contact with one another, support each other. Don was nice enough to come out to New Jersey earlier in the year. Let's see, I think we need to turn on the lights. I'm going to be showing some slides.
You ready for the first one?
Yeah. What I'm going to talk about today is Edison's phonograph recording activity during one specific year, a real important year, 1888. And I know that as phonograph collectors, most of you are familiar with the early history of recorded sound, but for the benefit of those that aren't, I'll give a quick overview of what happened in the 11 years between 1877, when the phonograph was invented, and the year I'm going to be focusing on, 1888. After an initial flurry of activity in 1877 and 1878, Edison did very little work in the field of recorded sound for several years. And that's because in 1879, in the early 1880s, he and his assistants at the Menlo Park, New Jersey laboratory became heavily involved with the development of the incandescent light bulb, pretty much to the exclusion of all other projects. It wasn't until late of 1886, in the face of competition, that Edison returned to work on the phonograph. In the mid-1880s, two experimenters, Chichester Bell and Charles Sumner Tainter, with funding from Alexander Graham Bell, developed a recording machine that they called the graphophone that used wax-coated cardboard cylinders as the recording medium. Wax cylinders had two distinct advantages over the tinfoil sheets that Edison used on the original phonograph. First, there was improved sound quality, and secondly, because the wax records retained their cylindrical shape when they were removed from the machine, they could be reused many times, unlike tinfoil. Now, it's often said that Thomas Edison lived and breathed competition. So facing this challenge from Bell and Tainter, he soon afterwards developed his own improved phonograph in the fall of 1887. And beginning in December, he did some very limited preliminary exhibiting of a machine of the design you see in the slide there. Like the Bell-Tainter graphophone, it also used a wax cylinder record. The recordings that I'm going to present this evening are some selected examples from a group of recordings made in the following year, 1888. And these are some of the oldest sound recordings that exist anywhere. The reason that they're available to be heard today is that because a couple years ago, 43 of these early cylinders were re-recorded onto modern audio tape at the Rodgers and Hammerstein Archive, which is at Lincoln Center in New York. Okay, next slide. This is a few of the cylinders out of that group of 43. And you can see that they look a lot different than cylinders from the 1890s. They're much kind of an ivory color. They're a little bit taller. And can that focus anymore? Yeah. They're also a little bit thinner around this, in this dimension there. We can flip to the next slide. That's a slide of the machine that we used that is owned by the Rodgers and Hammerstein Archive. As you can see, it's a really high-tech, modern cylinder playback machine that enables you to play fragile cylinders like this with very little risk of damage. Okay, next. And this is the engineer at the archive re-recording one of the cylinders. His name is Adrian Cosentini. Okay. And then someone who some of you might be familiar with, phonograph and record dealer out on Long Island named Peter Dilge, helped preparing the cylinders by cleaning them with a camel hair brush, and also gave some technical advice to Adrian, the engineer. Adrian really is an expert on the modern equipment, and he works mostly with acetate discs and a little less with cylinders, so Peter was there to kind of help familiarize him with cylinders. And then I took the photos and kept notes of what we did. Okay, next. The story of how and why these cylinder recordings were originally made begins around the time that this photo was taken on June 16, 1888. Edison at the time had recently completed construction of the West Orange, New Jersey laboratory and had a full team of experimenters working extended hours on development of phonograph. And it was on the day of this photo that Edison and his assistants came to a temporary stopping point in the development of what they called the perfected wax cylinder phonograph. That's Edison sitting there in front of the perfected phonograph here, with 3 cylinders in front. Okay, next. That's a close-up of what I'm pretty sure is that first model. Okay, next slide. This is another photo taken on that very same day, June 16, 1888. And it shows Edison in the center and the perfected phonograph surrounded by some of the inventor's chief experimenters. And also, seated on the far right, holding the hat, this person here, is Edison's European sales and marketing agent. His name is George Garreau, and he's very much involved with a lot of these cylinder recordings, so I'm going to focus on him. Garreau was an American who lived in London, and as early as November of 1887, he had made plans with Edison to exhibit the new phonograph in England with the aim of stirring up interest in future sales, as well as to overshadow the bell-tainted graphophone as much as possible with heavy press coverage. Soon after this photo was taken, Garreau returned to his home in London, and the perfected phonograph was delivered across the Atlantic with one of Edison's West Orange technicians, who's named H.C. Hamilton. On June 27th, Garreau sent word by telegram to Edison that the phonograph had arrived safely at his home in London, which he called Little Menlo, named after Edison's Menlo Park laboratory. This is the telegram they sent telling Edison that the phonograph had arrived. It's a little difficult to read, so I'll read it to you. It says, "First phonograph received today. Every word perfectly clear and distinctly understood by every member of my family, including child 7 years old. Accept heartiest congratulations on this unparalleled triumph of mind over matter." And I think that the telegram is a little misleading. It reads kind of like it was intended to be used as a press release in the United States. The perfected phonograph that Garreau had with him actually was the third design that Edison had made for a wax cylinder machine. The first, as I mentioned earlier, was completed in the fall of 1887, and the second was completed in the spring of 1888. 2 days after its arrival in London on June 29th, Garreau took the phonograph to the Handel Festival at the Crystal Palace Auditorium in London and set up in the press gallery and recorded excerpts from a performance of the Handel oratorio Israel in Egypt. And this is a drawing of that occasion. You can see, I'm pretty sure this is George Garreau there. This is the phonograph and batteries powering the motor, and the recording horn they have extended over the balcony. And you can tell from the photo that they're pretty far from the stage. They're in the back of the auditorium. Three of the cylinder recordings from this day were fortunately among the group which we recorded 2 years ago. And I'd like to play one of them now. And as you'll hear, it's a very faint recording. And that has to do with the positioning of the phonograph being so far away from the stage. special thing about this particular recording is, as far as I know, it's the earliest existing example of recorded music.
How many voices were in that choir?
Oh, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. There's a tag that was with one of the cylinders that was labeled Chorus of 4,000 Voices Recorded with Phonograph over 100 yards away. On the following day, June 30th, Garreau recorded his first phonogram to be sent to Edison in West Orange. That's, see, it says down here, Colonel Garreau, first message to Edison. Phonogram was the term that they used in this period to mean spoken word recordings that were made to be sent through the mail like a letter. Edison's intention in this early period was for wax cylinder phonograms to actually replace the written letter. And I'd like to compare that idea to voicemail today. Similar idea, technically a little different. But Garreau was not able to go ahead immediately with his plans for a full-scale press conference. Apparently he was having some technical difficulties with the new machine. And because this was set up as a promotional event, they were very thorough about photographing the phonograph in use because they wanted to show people how the different possibilities. So I have a few examples here. This one shows a person listening to a recorded cylinder and then writing what the cylinder is saying onto paper there. And this is a young woman listening to a recorded cylinder typing. And this one is kind of interesting. It's a person listening to a recorded cylinder and then sending the message out by telegraph. It's a telegraph key there. Okay. This is the funniest one. This is George Garreau lying in bed, speaking into the phonograph, because he wanted to show that if you had a special idea in the middle of the night, you could record it. Make sure you didn't forget it. Meanwhile, to help Garreau with his planned press conference, Edison sent his chief phonograph business associate, Ezra T. Gilliland, to London with a second phonograph, one of the second of the 3 designs made thus far. That's that second design. And it's really similar to the perfected phonograph, except it doesn't have the big governor on the side there. It's the main difference. Three days after Gilliland's arrival, Garreau held his first major press conference with the phonograph on August 14th, and actually used 2 phonographs at this press conference, the one that Garreau originally had sent over and the second design that skill he brought with him. Now, George Garreau was what you might call a very creative promoter. He knew how to draw the attention of the press. This is one of the invitations that Garreau had printed up for the press conference. It's also kind of hard to read, so I'll read it to you. This is basically the person they're inviting. It says, Colonel Garreau, at home, Little Menlo, which is the name of his home. Then it gives his address and the date. And then here, in pretty large letters, it says, to meet Mr. Edison. And then in small letters written in Latin, it says, non presentem sed eloquentem. Which in Latin means eloquent but not present. The press conference drew a large crowd of reporters, most of whom were expecting to actually meet the world-famous Thomas Edison. I have an account of the event published in a London newspaper, written by one of the reporters who attended. It read, quote, when I arrived at Colonel Garreau's pretty house at Upper Norwood on Tuesday afternoon, I was in high spirits. I understood that I was about to meet Edison. Where is the great man? I once asked of my gallant and handsome host, who looked as gaudy as a butterfly in his striking blazer. Edison, exclaimed he. Edison? Why, he is at the other side of the Atlantic, I expect. You hadn't seen my little Latin joke. Eloquent but not present. So the reporters were annoyed, but when they heard about the phonograph, most of them decided to stay and see the demonstrations that Garreau had planned. According to this same news article, the program for the evening included several cylinder recordings of Thomas Edison himself, including a recitation of a poem by Edison, a soliloquy by Edison, whistling by Edison, and even a song by Edison. But unfortunately, those were not among the group that we re-recorded. That would have been interesting to hear Edison singing. Those would have been recorded in West Orange and sent to London. What we do have in this group of cylinders are some that Garreau and his guests recorded in London and then mailed back to West Orange. This next cylinder I'll play is titled London Press Congratulations to Edison. And this was recorded on that evening. Basically what Garreau did is he would introduce one of the reporters, say which paper he was from, and then the reporter would say hello and congratulations to Edison. And this unfortunately is one of the less audible recordings, but it's a pretty significant one, and I still think it's pretty interesting to hear. Flip the next slide. That's a slide of Garreau being interviewed by a reporter using a phonograph. They also, on that evening, made and played a number of piano recordings for the press. Garreau had several musical instruments in his home. As you can see from this slide here, there's a grand piano and an organ back there, and this girl's playing a violin, and that is George Garreau playing a banjo. And then the phonograph is up top on the balcony here with the horn extending down, recording music. The next cylinder I'm going to play is a piano and cornet duet of the song The Lost Chord, composed by Arthur Sullivan. And this, fortunately, is pretty nicely preserved. They also recorded a woman named Mrs. Shaw, who was famous at that time for being a professional whistler. She was known as the whistling prima donna. And she was from the United States, but at the time was touring, doing whistling performances in Europe, and happened to be there that night. After a full program of cylinders and a lot of technical difficulties, the night ended with a round of cheers to Edison. says, the first time that John Bull was ever known to cheer the Stars and Stripes. Throughout the fall of 1888, Gros exhibited the phonograph for different scientific societies around London. This slide was taken in November of that year at a meeting hall called the Old Speech Room at Harrow. And you can see the two phonographs there, and that's one of these boxes like was in the slide earlier that contained cylinders. Gros also held several phonograph parties, and at these parties he would invite prominent members of English society to his home for dinner, where they would be served generous quantities of wine. And after dinner, Gros and his guests would listen to records on phonograph, as well as make their own recordings. The next cylinders that I'm going to play are from the evening of October 5th, 1888. One of the guests that night was England's Postmaster General, named Cecil Raikes. As postmaster, he was considered to be of key importance to the future of the phonograph in England. If the wax cylinder record was going to replace the written letter as they planned, they would first have to have the full support of the post office. Apparently, back in July, when Gros first arrived, some of the cylinders that he tried to mail back to Edison were damaged by the English Postal Service because they were mistakenly thought to contain dynamite. I'm going to play a sequence of recordings from this phonograph party, October 5th. And the first handout gives a transcript. And let's see, I don't have any slides, so we can turn on one of the lights maybe. I have some slides later, but not for this.
Did everybody see it?
Little Menlo, October the 5th, 1888.
Well, I wanted to mention, to notice at the beginning of this recording how Gros opens the cylinder as if he were starting a written letter. He gives the address and the date and then a greeting.
Little Menlo, October the 5th, 1888. Phonograph, Gros to Edison. Dear Edison, I propose to conclude a most interesting and agreeable evening, so far as I am concerned, by introducing to you a few friends who have honored me this evening by their presence here. Each of them has expressed a desire to say a few words to you, and I am sure you will be glad to hear their voices, and I am glad to be the medium of communicating them to you. Need I say, through your marvelous phonograph. First, Right Honorable Federal Raikes, the Majesty's Postmaster General. Now listen to Mr. Raikes' voice. We thank you for a most interesting and delightful evening. We feel that you are to become inventors of a new magic. We regard this invention as destined almost to revolutionize the means of human communication. And we wish you all success in promoting a discovery which cannot fail to have the most beneficial results for the whole community of nations. Certain Raikes, Her Majesty's Postmaster General. I think I have the pleasure of introducing you a name that is as familiar to you and all of our countrymen
say to myself and my family, Mr. Edmund Yates, this is the record of a most marvelous dinner, transmitted to you by your most marvelous inventions. If I lack words to describe the dinner, it is because I am so impressed and so enchanted by your invention that I find myself much more stupid than I ought to be after the grand excitement of our friends' meats and wine. Edmund Yates, not Her Majesty's Postmaster General, but one who was a poor clerk under Her Majesty's Postmaster General for 25 years. We will now pass on to the next photograph, which will begin with a record that I am sure you will receive with infinite delight. Knowing your love for music, I need only say that the record would be the voice of the great composer, Sir Arthur Sullivan, whose music is as well known in America as it is in England, and as well loved by those who know it. Sentimental October 5th, 1888, from School to Edison, continuation of introduction of praise. Now listen to the voice of Sir Arthur Sullivan. Dear Mr. Edison, my friend Edmund Yates has been a little incoherent. He is conscious of the excellent dinner, the good wine he has done. Therefore, I think you will excuse him. He has his lucid intervals. Myself, I can only say that I am astonished and somewhat terrified as the result of this evening's experiment. Astonished at the wonderful power you have developed, and terrified at the thought that so much idiot bad music may be put on record forever. But all the same, I think it is the most wonderful thing that I have ever experienced, and I congratulate you with all my heart on this wonderful discovery. Arthur Sullivan.
The three remaining recordings that I'm going to play tonight each date from the same time period, but they were made closer to home. This next one is the only recording of Thomas Edison's voice that survives from this early period. And until 2 years ago, when we re-recorded these cylinders, it wasn't generally known that this cylinder existed. I have a transcript of the recording, which is the next page of your handout. And I'll play the recording first, and then I'll say a few words about it.
Now Mr. Blake has used this theory around the world, and used to around the world on the phonograph. I'm not glad to anything. I have sent you on the people, and cannot even Liverpool, and from Liverpool to London, from London on the London and Brighton Railroad to Brighton, and from Brighton we'll go on those little 2-cent steamers about this channel to Calais, and from Calais we'll go on to Sheffield to Spurs and on. I can't give you the exact precise pronunciation of this railroad, but I guess you'll understand. We'll get into Paris and make for the Grand Hotel. Then in the morning we'll go to our banks, receive money on our letters and credit. Then we will go and sail out to Paris for about 2 weeks, go to Berlin. After we've stayed about 2 days in Berlin and got the blues, we'll go to St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg we go to Moscow, and from Moscow back for the same route to Berlin. And from Berlin we go to Vienna, pumpkin. I think they call it pumpkin, but that's not a very nice thing to do. I like to call it tulip. Well, next to tulip, we go to Milan. Milan, we go to Rome. Rome, we go across the Mediterranean Sea. I don't know, but when I'm a little out about geography, we go to Alexandria to the Suez Canal, to the Red Sea, into the Bay of Bengal, and then to Bombay. Bombay, we probably get to the colony and stay in the hospital 2 months and have lots of fun. And then we go to Calcutta to Singapore on the railway on Senegal, and then to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Tokyo, Tokyo on the Pacific company to San Francisco to Austin to Laramie, Cheyenne to Omaha to Chicago to Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, New York. Now, Mr. Blaine wants to say a few words on another cylinder, so my young man can bring it over to the laboratory. I want to put it through a process, get several hundred duplicate cylinders, so other people can hear what we say. Goodbye.
And you notice again, he signs it off like as if he were writing a letter with his name at the end. As you heard, Edison is describing a trip around the world on the phonograph, starting and ending in New York City. The circumstances around which the cylinder was made are not totally clear. It's most likely that it was made as a demonstration of the phonograph, similar to what Garreau was doing in London. I believe that he was trying to get across the idea that a person could make a recording of their voice and then send it anywhere in the world as easily as one could mail a letter. He begins the record by saying, "Now, Mr. Blaine, as you've been nearly around the world, I'll take you around the world on a phonograph." We're not totally sure who Mr. Blaine is, but one theory, and I think it's pretty possible, is that it might be James G. Blaine, who was a senator from the state of Maine. James G. Blaine had been traveling throughout Europe in 1887 and the first half of 1888. And then in the fall, he returned to the United States to campaign for Benjamin Harrison, who was the Republican presidential nominee. So it makes sense. Like Garreau in London, Edison was giving phonograph demonstrations to prominent people in the United States. And I've been looking through, in preparing this talk, I've looked through a lot of old newspaper articles trying to possibly date this Edison cylinder recording. And I haven't really found a totally concrete confirmation of exactly when it was made, but I found a couple clues which are in the handouts there, the last 2 pages. The first one is October 26, 1888, from the New York Tribune, and you see it describes this fair that took place in Orange, New Jersey, where they exhibited the phonograph, and then it lists some of the records that were played. And one of them, by the arrow there, says Mr. Edison's account of his trip around the world. So, and then the other clue that I came across is the last page of the handout. There's a short article. At that time, there were a lot of articles about James G. Blaine, where he was. And there's a short clip here on October 25th that says James G. Blaine, at present, is staying in New York and will be traveling around the local area campaigning. So I think that's a pretty good, those are a couple pretty good clues. So it might be that that's around the time when this record was made. Another thing that I realized reading through a lot of these newspaper clippings things from this year is that even though recording speech on the phonograph was considered to be really the most important goal, Edison's employees were, in fact, doing a pretty significant amount of musical recording. As we saw before, although on a fairly informal level, musical recording experiments were happening in London. And we need the lights off because I have a couple more slides. Okay. By early 1889, George Garreau, in his London office, had a special music recording room. This photo was taken in there. It's a little hard to see, but if you look closely, especially at a print with a magnifying glass, you can tell that this person is playing some kind of long horn instrument, and apparently being recorded by this recording horn there and that phonograph there. And you can see they were trying a number of different size horns, and so doing experimentation. Okay. And this is that same room, but looking the other direction. You see the phonograph set up here with the recording horn to record this upright piano. And back home in New Jersey, recording experiments were being carried out in a much more systematic way. A West Orange lab experimenter named Theodore Wangeman was assigned by Edison specifically to carry out musical recording tests. And I'm going to end here with a couple examples of these really early musical recording experiments. This first one was definitely engineered by Theodore Wangeman, who was this experimenter. And what's neat about it is he introduces the cylinder, and it's a little hard to get first time through, so I'll just read to you what he says. He says, "The Patterson Waltz, sung by Miss Effie Stewart of New York City, Orange, New Jersey, February 25th, 1889, meaning the year 1889. This is so here it's a soprano, not the greatest soprano, but possibly the oldest existing operatic record.
The button ball struck by Miss Effie Stewart of New York City, on New Jersey, February 25th, 1889.
One of the news articles that I came across talked about musical recording experiments, and I just wanted to read a little quote from there. It said, quote, "Mr. Edison is constantly improving the phonograph, though he has already brought it to a state of perfection as far as repronouncing the tones of the human voice employed in conversation. Much yet has to be done in imitating vocal music. Instrumental music is very successfully reproduced." And that was November of 1888. And the last one I'm going to play here is a band record. And it's, in my opinion, is surprisingly good. There's an awful lot of bass on there. And one interesting thing about it is they're included in the band is a big bass drum and a snare. a snare drum, which is something that wasn't really recorded much during the acoustical period. It sounds to me like it hits a locked groove, but it sounds to me like they cheer at the end there. Back up. Like that, it's kind of like cheers for the start of the recording industry. In preparing this talk and really figuring out what these cylinders are, it's really clarified my understanding of Edison's early intentions for the wax cylinder. And really two major points became clear to me. First of all, I've always wondered why Edison would have sent his first and possibly only perfected phonograph to London in June of 1888, immediately after it was completed. Why not keep it at home where he could do some further experimentation on it or exhibit it in local areas in the United States? But now I see that this does make sense in light of the fact that he wanted to demonstrate how spoken word recordings could be sent to and from far places, faraway parts of the world, like London and West Orange. So it's really clear that Edison wanted the wax cylinder to be accepted as a type of voicemail. And secondly, I have a better understanding of why Edison didn't immediately market the phonograph as a musical entertainment device. It's often said that during this early period of the wax cylinder, Edison was opposed to the idea of using the phonograph for musical entertainment. But why is it then back in 1878 when he invented the phonograph, one of the uses that he listed was as a way to reproduce music? And I think that really the situation was more that he felt that more time was needed to develop the phonograph further for musical purposes, and that's why Theodore Weineman was assigned to experiment with musical recordings at the laboratory beginning in early '89 and throughout the first years of the 1890s. All right, well, thanks a lot.
Beautifully done. I appreciate all the work you've done to keep the lights on, for one thing, and to bring us a picture of Edison that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
Your family's got to be proud of you in this regard. And I like it because he's young and has so much hair. And none of it's gray. That's even better. Thank you again very much. Beautiful job. Well, I'd like to move in now to the presentation of awards, and so Paul, if you could come forward and take care of that for us, please.
For me was meeting someone, and it's interesting, you know, as Jerry, you know, brought Edison to life with, to us this evening through these recordings. I've had the great fortune for the past couple of years through Dr. Lynn Dolan back there to be introduced to the oldest individual that personally worked with Thomas Edison. And I think that there can be no reservations about, you know, this statement, because Bill McDonald is 102 and a half years old. And we had Lynn and I had and Bobby had the pleasure to take him out to breakfast just a couple of weeks ago. And I shared this with you, and I had the opportunity to meet him on his 100th birthday, and he's just as sharp today as he was when he worked with Thomas Edison in Edison's laboratory. And he worked with Edison during the 20s through 24 or so forth. And you know that Edison died in 1931, and like, you know, with the 6 years difference